Joining me now, Congressman, Washington, D.C., represents the 5th District of Virginia. They're not having a crazy convention on Saturday. They already nominated Tom. He's going to be facing off with a Democratic opponent that wrote an anti-Semitic book. We can hear all about that coming up pretty soon. But Tom Garret, Republican Congressman, the Central Virginia area around Lynchburg, represents the 5th District of Virginia. Tom, good to have you with us.
Yeah, man, I was sitting on hold listening to you talk about how I normally call in on time, thinking, well, this is surreal. And anyway, yeah, good to be here.
Sorry about that. I apologize. You always call in on time, right? Always. We appreciate that.
Except for when I don't. But no, yeah, it's good to be on.
And if you don't, you always text me and say you're going to be late or you're not going to be there, so I appreciate that. You know what? What is going on with this ZTE company, this Chi-Com telecom company? I mean, all the work that's been done in convincing, in us and the president, convincing America how these Chinese companies are ripping us off and how they're dumping products and how they're stealing our stuff and how we have to put tariffs on them. And why would the president turn around and then say, well, ZTE is okay because it's costing China jobs? I mean, that just came out of like anything the president's done. That one I don't get.
Yeah, it doesn't seem consistent. Having said that, what I've learned is you don't always finish where you start. So before I sort of throw out the old paradigm and question my faith in how the world functions, we'll give this one a little bit of time. So yeah, it's certainly a departure from the standard tome.
I don't know what he's doing with it. Maybe it's part of the negotiation. It kind of seemed like somebody went to his office and was whining, and he said fine, which is one of the weaknesses of this president. I'm very supportive, as you know, but that's one of the things that you got to look at. Sometimes he'll just want to placate somebody, and I don't think this one is thought through. And I think hopefully there's a bigger picture with it.
Well, and you just took the words out of my mouth. There's a whole lot going on here, and again, I'm sort of being intentionally careful because it's certainly, right. I mean, in a world full of circles, this one's a square. Having said that, let me suggest that there are a much larger series of bilateral negotiations right now with the Chinese, and you know what you hear publicly, but you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So given the fact that, generally speaking, the duck rule applies if it walks like one and quacks like one, this does not make sense, and so I presume there are things that we do not yet know.
So let's put it on hold. Let's put it in the box and see how it plays out. Let's get to...
Well, this thing's sort of blown up in the last 36 hours, so...
Because this
is not a long time frame in the grand scheme.
We'll see how it plays out, but it is out of character and inconsistent. And, when things don't look right, like you say, square is round, round is square, it brings into question the whole policy. Because, when I saw that, actually when I first saw it, I thought it was on The Onion because I'm like, well, he would never do that. And then as you looked into it, obviously they had a meeting with him and they were concerned about this company. But of all the companies put tariffs on, like, these guys are the worst. So we'll see how it plays out. Let's get to DACA. What on earth is going on with this now? You've got 25 Republicans saying they're going to combine with all the Democrats and put Dreamers on the floor and make Republicans vote no on the Dreamers without any of the other legislation tied to it that the president has requested. Can you tell our listeners what is going on?
Well, the way it's structured, there'd be a series of bills that went on the floor under a sort of obscure concept called Queen of the Hill, where each bill went up for a vote, and then whichever one got the most votes would end up getting a vote by the full House. I think there's frustration across the board on the inability to get anything done on this. Having said that, you need to wait and see what emerges. If the Goodlatte bill emerges, I think that's a pretty strong bill to strengthen the borders and create a better circumstance as it relates to not repeating the same mistake over and over again. But it's certainly an end around. The thing that frustrates me, having carried a discharge petition before to try to get people to keep their word on health care, is how many people are willing to say, yeah, we'll vote to discharge these and then pick from multiple plans versus how many said, oh, well, we just don't do that, when it had to do with, votes that a lot of these folks had cast in 2015 on health care that they were afraid to cast again now that there was a different occupant of the White House, right? So that it's a little bit of a subtext, but that to me is the most frustrating sort of reality there. And maybe it's personal at some level because it was my bill to do the health care discharge, but I don't know. Let's see how this thing plays out. There's still an entire Senate. There's a president with a veto pen. I think the previous administration reminded us. But it's an interesting precedent. Having said that, again, while I don't necessarily agree with the subject matter, it's a refreshing day to see some stuff start to move around here maybe. So there's that, I guess, too. So anyway.
If you were to make a prediction, Congressman Garret, how do you see this playing out with DACA?
Well, I don't do predictions. And if I had $1 for every time I said that on your show, I could probably buy you dinner. But if this is the impetus to get us to do what we should have done with border security to begin with, right? I've been pretty clear on DACA. I don't mind creating a circumstance wherein we can acknowledge the reality of the young people who were brought here as children. I'm not going to do it until we secure the southern border, because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result. We did this in the 80s with the Reagan-O'Neill amnesty. That was back when Republican presidents and Democrat leadership actually worked together. This is an interesting one. Again, though, I think that this, to me, the meta message here is the frustration that there are big promises that have been made that have to have legislative action, because the president's done a pretty good job of keeping some pretty remarkable promises that just aren't moving. And that's a pox on the people in the legislature for the most part. So, despite the subject matter, the willingness to sort of go throw the football down the field, if you will, is probably a good thing. I just hope that at some point it manifests itself in some things that have been priorities of ours.
Well, look, whenever you got 25 Republicans saying they're going to team up with all the Democrats in order to get a clean DACA bill to the floor, I mean, it isn't going to pass. The president's not going to sign it. It's not going to get through the Senate. So I'd have to ask myself, if I'm one of these 25 Republicans, why would I put my team in this position where now they have to vote on something that is meaningless anyway because the president's not going to sign it? So the whole thing is ridiculous. And, we got so many problems, and there's this grandstanding, this jumping up and down. This is why, Congressman, people hate politics and they hate Congress, and your approval ratings are like 8%. It's nonsense like this.
That's why we keep the lobbyists around. They're the only people that people like less than members of Congress.
That lobbyists and, I guess, some of the lawyers, right? That's about it. Okay, Tom Garret with us, Congressman, 5th District, Virginia. The 6th District Convention is Saturday. I know you don't want to talk about this, so let's give it 90 seconds, all right? Man, there's a lot of shenanigans going on. I mean, people getting thrown off delegate list, and, I mean, what are they doing there? This thing is such a mess. It's so ugly. I mean, you go on any of the social media, everybody's at each other's throat. I got to tell you, this is why I hate conventions. And when you juxtapose this to the Tom Garret 5th District Convention, and there was hand-to-hand combat there, no question, but nothing like this, Congressman. This thing is just horrible. Whoever wins, there's going to be complaints and filings, and nobody's going to get together. It's just nasty. They kicked me out. I'm not even going to go. I couldn't get a card table. I'm just done with the whole thing. I'm tired of it. I'm sick of arguing with him. It just doesn't matter anymore. My whole staff's pissed off. Nobody's going on our team. We're done with it. What's the deal here? And can somebody step in and, stop the nonsense?
Yeah, I don't know. I wonder if when the convention kicks off, they're going to play Destroyer by the Kinks, right?
Yes, exactly.
Or Paranoia by Green Day. I don't know. I mean, some of this, I think, is the manifestation of a perception of something nefarious afoot that's created sort of a snowball effect rolling down the hill, wherein anything is perceived as some underhanded scheme. In many instances, perhaps it isn't. But, I watched this in the 5th District with the Democrats' nomination, right? I mean, there were threats of lawsuits and all sorts of stuff in the newspapers, and there was an accusation of racism by some of the Democrat committee members, and then some people quit their, unit chairmanships, and it's not a good way to go into a general election. Having said that, I think there's good folks up and down that ballot in the 6th District, and I would just sort of implore, really not so much the candidates, but some of the surrogates and staff to, stop and think just for a moment, contemplate commonality versus that which separates them. That's something that this country could have used as advice in any number of circumstances, going back for the last however many years. So this is not new. Again, we saw this in the run-up to the 5th District Convention for the Democrats, and it's not cool, but it is what it is. And I guess Sunday this will be over with, and we'll have a nominee.
This is why I hate conventions, and I think the best thing the Republican Party can do is get rid of them. I mean, it shrinks the party. We fight each other. This is why they can't win a statewide election. I think they're horrific. And if you had a primary, they'd all be advertising. They'd all be on debating. They'd be fighting it out. And, the end of the night at 10 o'clock, somebody would win and everybody shakes hands. I mean, this thing is just – I hate conventions, and I think they're the reason why Virginia Republicans can't – they've lost 9 in a row. They're going to get beat again in November. It's going to be 10 in a row. They're not going to beat Kane. But at least on the Senate side, right, they have a primary. Somebody's going to win, and that's the end of it. They all shake hands and move on. Let's get to North.
Little sunshine this morning, John. I mean,
I really don't like conventions. I just don't like them.
I think the strength of conventions, whether it's on the Democrat side or the Republican side, is allowing the sort of activists to the people who care enough to determine a nominating method, right? I mean, I prefer primaries too. But what we did this past year was we said, you know what, you want a primary, we're good with the primary. You want a convention, we're good with the convention. I have a responsibility to be consistent with that, which I said that I would try to do when I ran for office. My job is not to dictate to the citizens of the 5th District or the Commonwealth of Virginia exactly what the nomination method should be. So I get what you're saying, but I think from where I sit, I need to be careful because this job is really a position of trust and sort of
you got the nomination in a convention the old-fashioned way. You earned it. You didn't cheat and try to steal delegates and throw them off lists and all this nonsense. Anyway, let's move on. I'm sick of talking about wasting my time. We've got 2 minutes here. Let's get to North Korea. Kim Jong-un saying, look, I'm doing all this stuff. I'm trying to have talks and end the war that hasn't ended since 1953. And here the U.S. is going around doing military joint operations with the South Koreans. That doesn't feel good to me. Maybe I'll just get out of the whole thing. What do you think?
Well, I think we've probably talked about this a few times, and I know I've talked about it a couple dozen times on various outlets. What I've always said is, real progress, good direction, but you don't need to spike the football. These guys have a storied history of breaking their word. And here you see exactly the same pattern that we've seen in the past. At some level, I think Kim's doing a favor by sort of tipping his hand early because, when President Clinton talked about a North Korean nuclear deal that would rid the Korean Peninsula of nuclear weapons 24 years ago, when he said publicly that he'd solve that problem, it was only afterwards that the North Koreans completely went cattywampus sort of sideways on the deal. Yes, I did just say cattywampus on the air. And in this instance, they're sort of saying this is what we do beforehand. The ultimate truth is that two nations who've been allies for generations, the United States and South Korea, holding joint military exercises is something that happens all the time, and it's in fact so frequent and common that you almost never hear about it. So it's kind of like, when the parent leaves the room and the siblings are together and one of them's looking for an excuse to yell, she hit me. Having said that, I don't think you back away just yet. I think you let this thing play out, which is what we've seen indications the administration is doing.
Right.
But I also think that canceling exercises previously planned, when we've been doing this quite literally for 70 years, is a bad signal. Now, I think, based on my analysis of the South Korean administration, that they're relatively wobbly, and you may see a cancellation of the joint exercises on their part, right? You can't have joint exercises if one party decides not to participate. But this is exactly what we were cautioning about when we've said all along, that while we've made incredible progress, in some instances that beyond which I think many people would have imagined possible, this is going to be a bumpy ride, and we're dealing with an entity in North Korea who has a storied history of sort of zigging exactly when you expect them to zag. So just keep your eyes peeled. I would rather be where we are right now than where we were 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And let's see what we can get done.
I think you're spot on with that. Just wait, and this too shall pass, and we'll go on from there. Congressman Tom Garret.
Let me be clear as I try to sort of predict what might happen. I don't think it's unlikely that the South Koreans say, you know what, we'll postpone or cancel these exercises, but I don't think it should be us.
So your prediction is that the summit will go on, or North Korean will cancel?
I think that the summit goes on. I think it goes on because South Korea. You're making me make predictions again. I know.
I was just going to say that. I finally got you to make a prediction.
I think you did ask me about 5 weeks ago where I thought the summit would be, and I said Singapore. And lo and behold, 3 weeks later, they announced it would be in Singapore.
That's why we keep asking you.
But I think you may see the South Koreans cancel the joint exercises and the summit go on. But again, I mean, what the listenership should note here is that this is really a tactic, if not the tactic, from the North. So get sort of show some flexibility, glide a ways, and then throw a fit and suggest.
All right, we got to go. I'm out of time. Thank you, Tom Garret. More information, garret.house.gov. Got Tom Garret to make 2 predictions. One of them, Singapore, spot on.